impressive array of people, don't you think? No, all right. Is this working? Yeah, it is. Good. Okay, so I'd echo what Phil just said about the people who are going to be sharing today. It's really good to be together, and we're going to have a great day. So, oops, we're supposed to have a nice animated thingy there, but anyway, it isn't animated. But ignore the opportunity and the hope for a moment. Not that you ever want to do that.
Andy, before we start, just to remind people that we've got an online document that you can ask questions and make comments all as we go through today.
Yes.
Please be engaged with that. There's a little QR code up there if you want to take a moment just to open the document with your phone, and then we can get some feedback live from what you're thinking and how it's going, and we can reference that for questions in the last session as well.
So make sure you do that right now if you've got a phone, because it will really help you not only during the day, but for the very last session when we've got a good hour and a bit together to give more opportunity for feedback, comments, discussion, prayer. So take a note of that and use it, because each session, each workshop, we want we'll ask the same questions, same three questions for each of them for reflection and then later for feedback. So utilise that. Everybody happy with that? Okay, well let's move on. Yeah, right, okay. So that's, the animation isn't working, is that right? Or the way I sent it to you, is it? Can we make the animations work?
No, I can't see pictures, so that feels already.
Is it really? Okay. Well, like I say, I've shown this slide each time we've met, because it seems to me each year those three crises seem to get deeper. I don't know what you think about this. You can come back on that as well. Crisis of culture, crisis of church, crisis, just think of the Church of England right now, and crisis of personal faith. They're all interlinked, of course they are, but in a way you can dissect them out. And whether it's the culture, so-called culture wars, but I don't even think it's that, it's just the confusion and the anxiety, the age of anxiety we live in, and the impact on the church and vice versa. And personally, I mean, do please, in due course today, give your views on that. But the thing about crisis is, it really is an opportunity. When Jesus came to earth, it was a time of crisis in ministry. It was all crisis. So crisis isn't just entirely negative. It's where engagement at the front line is happening. There's a crisis going on. Crisis actually can be something that is really upbeat as well as challenging. So that's why I put those words opportunity and hope, because for us as the people of God and for the kingdom of God, it's a time of opportunity and of hope as well. I guess if we didn't think that, we probably wouldn't be sitting here. We'd be at home with our heads buried in our pillows at this point on a Saturday morning. So what I think Phil, because he's talked about it recently, and I agree with it, he's said something along these lines, that in a way when we think of culture, and it's very, very important we are thinking of culture, there is stuff that is upstream of that, meaning something that precedes that. That culture is what we see and experience, but it's the reason culture is what it is and develops as it does and changes is because stuff is happening that is not nearly so visible, but is responsible for the culture that you live in. And when you change culture and you live in other cultures and you come here, it is called culture shock, isn't it? Why is it a shock? Because it's so different. It's not just the experience of it, but the reasons why it's so different. And so upstream from that is, call it theology, philosophy, belief system, framework, if you like. But even that is not the most fundamental, the most profound. The most profound, and Phil will be picking up on this, I hope he, later on, is what some people call worldview, which is simply the presuppositions and assumptions we all carry if we're brought up in a particular context, culture, that we never think about, almost never think about. You don't roll out of bed on a Monday morning thinking, I wonder what my worldview is going to be like today. It doesn't work like that. Somebody's called worldview as the tinted specs, glasses that we all wear. They're different tints, they're different glasses, depending on what culture we've been brought up in. But we all have them, and we're unaware of them, but those are the things that profoundly influence and even determine what we think, say, do and act. Hence all this stuff like the stream. But change the metaphor a little bit, and we'll maybe come back to this, to a tree, put it the other way around. The roots of the system, rather like that worldview, the specs, the assumptions, presuppositions that we all carry, is like the roots of the tree. Not seen, but without the roots, no tree. And out of that grows, if you like, our beliefs, like the trunk, the culture we live in, like the branches that all connect together. And of course, what we then see visibly is what people say, do, speak. Get my point? The anthropologists talk about it in terms of worldview, belief system, value system, behaviours. Exactly the same idea. That's how life works. Collective life works. Now, that in itself is a huge thing, isn't it? But I think it helps maybe give us a bit of concept. And today, times like today, I think are helpful because we're trying to get a bit deeper than just how we do, even what we, how we live, and even what just we think, but actually what's the heart of things, the worldview, the biblical worldview, etc. Is that okay? So here we go. Think of it as it's a bit ambitious to call a title of a talk Intimacy, Identity, Belonging and Purpose, because each one of those ought to be a whole day conference or reflection. But I'll tell you why I came up with this title. At the church that we go to, the leadership team last year at one point called some of us together, John and me, my wife, and we sat down with them for a whole afternoon. It was very good, enjoyable. And they were thinking about discipleship in the church and had picked up on something that John Mark Comer had identified. In turn, he was picking up on first century rabbinic training and apprenticeship. And you may have come across it with him. And the idea was that there were 4 stages: to be with the rabbi, a younger person with an older rabbi, then as a result to become like that rabbi, to then do the things that he did, and then to help others to do the same. To be with, become like, to do, and help others. It's pretty good, isn't it? And it's a model, a base one, discipleship seems to make a lot of sense. So there was a lot of discussion, very helpfully, and out of that came the flip chart, etc., etc. Words, what kind of words might sum up each of those stages? And out of that came pretty much these words. Be with, intimacy. To become like, well, that's identity, but it's also verging into belonging, perhaps belonging in a broader corporate sense. And then to do the things, purpose. You could say help others, kind of equipping, if you like, and I'm going to leave that one out today. So that's where it came from. It seems to me that was a really helpful framework to understand, to begin to unpack a little bit more, because they're all relational, aren't they? You can argue the last one, but I think ultimately purpose should be a relational thing. Certainly those are very explicitly relational, so I think it fits very well. Okay, so there you go. Let's have a little thing. Now, as I was thinking about this whole thing, some question came to mind. In a way, these words are the response, or if you like, the answer to some very fundamental questions of who being us. I can't think of too many questions, again, that we don't wake up on a Monday morning saying, what is my purpose, or who am I intimate with? But at the root of who we are as human beings lie these kind of questions. They're existential questions, I think. What it means to be human. And so, in essence, from infancy, we'll think about this in a minute, from infancy, the moment we're born, we're, as it were, not vocally, but we're kind of asking these questions. Am I loved? Can I love? Who am I anyway? And what do other things, and those two are related questions. Who do I fit with? Who am I part of? What am I here for? And what can I do? That's pretty fundamental things, isn't it? It seems to me the response, or at least those questions, have to do with those very things of intimacy, identity. So we're going to try, in a fairly short space of time, to kind of reflect on each of those. It seems to me they're linked together in any case. Now, as I say, it's there's plenty more that could be said. I'm just kind of seek to open up and unpack a little bit what those things might mean, but also to get us reflecting and thinking, etc. So that's the whole purpose of today, is not to kind of just dump things on people, but say, so what do you think about that? How does that work? So the word, I looked it up. I like looking at origins of words. Etymology it's called. And it turns out that intimacy, intimate, comes from the Latin, 2,000 years ago, intimus. That's not bad, is it? And the word intimus is fairly straightforward too. In, which means in, funny enough. And timus is the superlative. Big, bigger, biggest. Is the biggest. Far, further, farthest. So it's the S, it's the most. Inmost. Innermost, we would say today. So it's the idea of going in, whatever that means, but to do it to the nth degree. The most in, the inmost. You get the idea? Oops, sorry. And I think that's quite interesting. Compare other things like ultimate is the same idea. So far, imus, the most far, the ultimate. So what we're talking about here is something that isn't just inward looking or inward facing, it's actually the most, it's the closest. You don't have to just have people that are intimate, you can have parts of a machine or something that are intimately linked, aren't they? So it can apply to anything, but the idea is very, very close. When it comes to people and relational dimension, human relational, it's something where the engagement and the connection is as close as it can get. And in a sense, it seems to me that the closest relationships are where you don't just approach a person and you're near to them and you just happen to share space with them, but something deeper happens, something more profound happens. There's an innermostness, an intimacy, and almost like an entering into the other person. That happens in marriage, doesn't it? It happens sexually. That's why sex is such a profound thing, and a spiritual thing, is because a part of a person enters another person, and vice versa. Not just physically, but spiritually in every way. And I knew this one, etc. Because we're dealing with the most profound dimensions of human existence. Intimacy. And my mind turns to that psalm that says deep is deep. And here's a quote of somebody who wrote that. The deep a man's need calls to the deep of God's fullness, and the deep of God's fullness calls to the deep of a man's need, of human need. Nothing can fully meet the depth of our need, but the depth of His Almighty goodness. And when we experience God, we worship especially. I think Roger once said, perhaps he quoted something else, that in a sense, spiritually speaking, worship is like love to God and vice versa. Not in a sexual sense, but sex is derived from that. It's the other way around. It's because spiritually we can engage with God, who is spirit, to such a degree that there's an I in you and you in me. What's that mean? It must be relational, and it's certainly spiritual. We're touching into something very profound right at the very beginning. That's what this word intimacy, it seems to me, is all about. Somebody needs to write a book on these subjects, I suppose. This is one that happens to come to my possession, and there's a whole chapter on that one called longing. And what we're dealing with here is the longing of the human heart, aren't we? And the thing about longing and relationships and all these things is it's very difficult to describe in words because it's not really a verbal thing at all, as we'll see in a minute. It's an experiential thing that touches into the very heart of what it means to be human and to be godlike, made in the image of God. So that's what we're dealing with, and it's very wonderful and it's very profound, longing. So, what I'm going to do slightly over-ambitiously is for each of these 4 words and ideas to have 3 different levels. How about that? Easily done in the next 5 lines. And the first is the human dimension, second is the biblical dimension, third is the so what. How does that work out dimension? The human person, the human baby, is born completely helpless. Unlike other mammals, where, horses and antelopes and things, within a few minutes they're laughing, they're running, they're cycling, they're able to do something. The human baby can do virtually nothing, certainly for the first months, if not, in a sense, the first 2 years. And so it's dependent. So what has been provided is the mother. Has everything the baby needs to survive. Oh yes, and there are others as well. But physically and emotionally, it's the mother. And so a very famous therapist, a man called pediatrician, a man called Donald Winnicott, said this: there is no such thing as a baby, there is only a baby and someone. Say that again. There's no such thing as a baby. You can't think of a baby, he says, in isolation from the someone, typically the mother. Biologically, that's certainly true. But no. Get the idea? It's touching into intimacy, isn't it? In fact, it's a very good article here by a man called Lewis Mumford, I will give the reference. Mother and baby are at first strangers to each other, but the mother, by affirming the baby's life for herself, establishes a joined entity in which each becomes part of the other. A little bit more. Mother-infant relationship may well be the most social of all human relationships. No other relationship, including that of the adult couple, tests the power of the human capacity to imagine one and become another, since at first it's non-verbal. Mother must come into touch with the forgotten language, non-verbal language, because everything's non-verbal at this point, that once was for humans, before we developed language, the only way to express our caring feelings for another. For the baby, innately social, the relationship with his mother is his introduction to humanity, his first human relationship, and the one that sets the tone for all his human relationships. Arguably, this is the most profound of any relationship amongst human beings, the mother-infant relationship. Because although the baby is now outside the mother's body, actually, like Winnicott says, they're still one. And so the physical and the emotional and perhaps even spiritual connection is in a way just as profound and as real as it was for Cruz and others. Extraordinary, isn't it? Ask any mother who's given birth to try and explain what it was like to carry that baby then to give birth. The words are not adequate. So, I talked a little bit about attachment last time, and that's what we're talking about, the attachment that is inbuilt, hardwired into both mother and infant to need each other, to be together, and to function together. And if the child had words to express what was inexpressible because it's existential, it's experiential, they might be words like this: am I lovable? Am I worthy of love and attention? And are you worthy of love or response or trust as well? That is what attachment is. And it's, it was, I think, Winnicott said, a good enough love is good enough. So you don't have to be perfect, But fortunately, 60 to 70% of us are securely attached from infancy. Begs a few questions, but essentially that's when it works, that's what it's all about. It is the provision in every dimension of that which is going to enable that little one to be a bigger one who's able to be secure in their own skin and able to connect with other people. That's the fundamental human issue. And let me just mention this intersubjectivity. It sounds a bit complicated, but it simply means as somebody put it, the betweenness, the relationship, the connection between two subjectivities, between two human beings, two minds, two experiences. Got that? Intersubjectivity. And it's if attachment provides the context, then this, somebody's called it mutual mind. It's the connecting of human with human. Intersubjective. And if the attachment provides the context, this provides the connection. That's why we have mirror neurons. It's how we're able to empathize. Somebody put it this way: before language, there was something else, more basic, more primitive, with unequal power that propelled us into language. Something that suddenly gave rise to the thinking processes that revolutionized mental life. That something else was social engagement with each other. The links that can join one person's mind with the mind of someone else, that's this intersubjectivity, mutual mind, especially to begin with emotional links, are the very links that draw us into thought. So Descartes did not get it right. I think, therefore I am. Actually, I am, and I connect, and I intersubjectize, therefore I can feel. It precedes language in terms of human development and also in terms of individual. Extraordinary, isn't it? Mm-hmm. This is the human being. And you can't describe a human being without reference to other human beings. Sounds like the image of God. So there's lovely words like attunement and resonance and mirroring, interpersonal communion. It sounds almost spiritual, doesn't it? It's not a Christian who came up with that. Somebody described it like a dance together of the mother and the infant. That are dancing together in this amazing non-verbal connection that is best described as interpersonal communion. Wow. Well, we'll stop there, but we won't. What should I go with that? Just before I go on to that, let me just say this. You've heard of mindfulness, I'm sure. It's one of the buzzwords of the 21st century. What it simply means is an awareness, consciously, existentially, mind, subjectively, of what's around you. So you walk into a room, most of the time we just focus on whatever you are, but actually that awareness is all to do with the right brain, I suppose the left brain, I'm sure Lincoln's going to talk about that later, an awareness of what is around. That's mindfulness. Nothing more profound than that, though it is quite profound. Somebody's then used the expression mind-sight, not just mindfulness, it requires mindfulness, but mind-sight is the awareness, not just of what's going on, but other people. Oh, now we're getting into that other territory. And so now being aware, it's the basis of empathy. It's where we pick up the vibes of another person. But there's something more. There's mindfulness, there's mind-sight, and then there's this neutral mind, or this subject, where you're not just aware, but you actually make the connection together. That's the heart of what empathy is. And so what we're talking about is the way in which these things happen. So, intimacy, again, when we think about the biblical dimension of things, it gets more profound because we bring God into the picture. And so I've just picked up on a few words. Many of you are familiar with this word, yada, the Hebrew for to know. And a few quotes. It encompasses a range of meanings related to knowledge and understanding. It's used to describe intellectual awareness, experiential knowledge, and intimate familiarity. It's quite a range, isn't it? You can know something, you can know someone. Often implies deep personal and relational knowledge, deeply relational, experiential, like between a husband and wife, as well as the covenantal relationship between God and humans, Yada. And there's that wonderful verse, and it's all over the place, Adam knew his wife, and then, remember when Moses meets God at the bush, and God says, I've seen suffering, I've heard the cries of the Israelites, I know their suffering. That's this word again. And I have, what's the next bit? I have come down. And I'm going to, isn't that what that's the gospel in the Old Testament seems to me? I've seen, I've heard, I know. And I've come down to do something about it. Therefore go. So much to say about that, but it connects with the next word, with this word Parnham, which is a plural word, like water is waters, really, maim, and Parnham is a plural word to describe the face. Why? Because the face is so expressive. You can't just sum it up with one singularity. It is plural. And so this word face, otherwise translated sometimes as presence. My presence with my face will go with you. May the Lord bless you. May his lift up the light of his countenance. Same word. In the Psalms, lots and lots. So that word is another expression. And the idea is that when God's face, like the face of the mother towards the infant, when the face of God is towards us, it's light. It's like the sun is like the face of God releases, and not releases, is light towards us. Look into his face, and you will see, and we will be saved. So you get that? Then, of course, the idea of oneness, Adam and Eve, husband, wife, John 14-17, especially 17, they may be one as we are one. So what is it about the relationship between Father, Son, and Holy Spirit that then is shared and embraced, just like an infant with the parents? And then, of course, Paul in Ephesians 5, I take the husband and wife oneness to be Christ and the church. So at every single level, the same. You get the kind of picture that from Genesis to Revelation, we are talking about a relational God who wants to, just like he experiences intimacy in interpersonal communion himself, so he wants to draw us into it. What could be more wonderful? What could be more good news than that? So today, I don't know what comes to your mind. It certainly may come to people's minds generally when they hear the word intimate or intimacy. What comes to mind for the average person in this country? Pardon? Sex? All right, sex then. And romance, that was what I was thinking about. So romance and sex. When I was running some courses more often at the moment, I went to the bookstore and looked on the section of relationships. What did I find? What books did I find? I found books on how to have a romantic relationship with another person. That's all there was on relationships. Lots of books, but just on that. So even when we talk about have a relationship, it's often couple relationship, isn't it? More often not sexual, perhaps romantic. Certainly when it comes to intimacy, it's a bit close to the mark, isn't it? Because immediately comes to mind, we're talking about sexual and romantic. Actually, intimacy is so much more than simply that. That is perhaps at best, it's the kind of sharp end or pinnacle, whatever you want to call it. But when we talk about intimacy in the terms we've just been talking about, it can be any human relationship that presupposes, of course, a degree of closeness and intentionality about it. That means you can be intimate with another person. And that is what we hunger for. That is what we long for. We want it with another person, but we also want to be part of, we'll get to belonging in about 5 hours' time, we want to belong with and identify with other people, don't we? We may not put it that way, but that's the longing of the human body. So I don't think I've never come across this term non-sexual intimacy before. I'm sure somebody who Googled it will be there, I'm sure. But it just struck me as what we are talking about. It's strange that we should be talking about something that we have to describe in negative terms. Non-sexual intimacy. Why? Because we are in such a sexualized, romanticized culture here. Maybe other cultures will get it and you don't need to say non-sex because they know about corporate and family and tribe clans. Is that fair? Many people from other contexts here. But in our Western context, it's so shot through with a particular way of understanding it that because it's individualised, isn't it? But I'd like to put it to us, my ladies and gentlemen, that what we're talking about, and I don't like that term nonsense, I just can't think of it. If you think of a better term, intimacy, leave it at that if you like, but you have to often qualify it, is actually what the gospel is about. God so loved the world that he gave. Even though you didn't know him, Sir Peter, you loved him. That's what love is. So it begs the question. Oh, sorry. I'm trying to think about a biblical metaphor, a human metaphor that maybe covers all these things that we're talking about. It seems to me that the best one, the most natural, the most even biblical, is about marriage and family. Where family isn't just a nuclear family, it's extended family as well. And so, whether it's God who says to Israel, you're my wife. Hosea, Isaiah. Whether Jesus, who is the husband, and the church is his bride, marriage of the Lamb, or whether it's the church's family, and we so brought up, many of us, on the Christian idea of brother and sister and all sorts of, we don't grasp the profound significance of when Paul and the others started to use that term. We are brother and sister, really, in the body of Christ. So anyway, I just kind of throw that at us. It seems to me that is a helpful overview. So a question at the end of each of these things, if we get there, how do we nurture this kind of instance we're talking about in an incredibly autonomous, individualistic, me-first culture? It's so shot through. It's like those specs that we wear. It's the tint. It is an autonomous, individualistic tint to the specs. And people coming on, you don't say anything, because, born in this country that has a Nigerian heritage kind of thing. So when he spent a year in Nigeria and came back to England, just shocked again at the degree to which we are way down that track. And we will not rediscover, whatever word, what it means to be the people of God engaging with other people without the dimensions that we're talking about here. It seems to me. Anyway, it's a question. Second identity. We'll see how it goes. So it seems to me that one flows from the other. Identity is a word that's used a lot in our culture today, but I would suggest that in a way that is not biblical, that is not founded on the kind of principles I believe that we're engaging, both on a human level, leave alone on a biblical level. Let me explain what I mean. Again, those different dimensions. It seems to me from all the human development evidence that we become who we are, our identity, out of who and how and where we grow from. It's not rocket science, this is it. In a sense, part of it is fixed. So I'm a man, I have pale looking skin, not just because of me, it's because of my genes. I'm this high, and actually much of my personality is determined not entirely, but to a certain extent. So actually, there is a givenness about our identity which comes from our parents biologically. That's, it's not very complicated, is it? But secondly, also, who I am and who I develop into comes from the nurture. So it's nature, nurture, they always play both of their parts. So the nurture dimension, what we were talking about attachment, but just generally our upbringing, both in terms of our mother, dad, our parents, whatever, in terms of our siblings, our family, and the wider clan or tribe culturally, will also determine and go into developing who I am. Again, that doesn't seem to be that controversial a thing to say. And much of this comes about through imitation. So the infant, from the very beginning, is imitating, isn't deciding to do it, just is. Within 42 minutes of birth, they are imitating facial expressions, the infant. Within, what's the figure? I don't know, it's here somewhere. Within 6 weeks, they imitate gestures that were shown to them the previous day. So it's all happening. That's the attachment process and all the rest of it. We are imitating. We become what we interact with. And it's most of what happens in the mind, in the brain, is unconscious. 99 point something. Very little your brain function is conscious. The vast majority is unconscious. That's where unconscious bias comes from. It isn't just a racial thing, it's a human thing. Because that's how we function. We're based on our experience of, at an unconscious level, we are thinking, feeling, and so on. Most communication, two-way communication, is non-verbal. Only perhaps 7% do the word. By age 3, each person has absorbed unconsciously 90% plus of their culture. You get the picture? It's just happening. And so who I am develops primarily. A little bit later down the line, there's a conscious dimension. But so much course has been laid down by that time that our identity has been formed. Operates, it's complexity to it, so it's multi-layered. It's a simple example, individual and group operates at all those levels. So I'm Andrew, that's the unique name I was given as an individual, but I'm Parnham, which is part of the immediate and wider and historic clan of the Parnhams. Get the idea? Same for you. And so there is concentric circles. Start typically with your mum, not always, but typically your mum and your dad and your siblings and your nuclear family and your wider family and your clan, and in human experience and development, until this rather odd thing called Western civilization, it extended and still does in most parts of the world to the clan, the tribe, etc. We are part of the whole. Keep that in. You with me? Well, a little bit quiet. Plenty of time later on to come back. And so, St. Clare of Assisi, we know well, don't we? 13th century person who said something really helpful. She says this, it's worth saying a couple of times. We become, she said, this is long-form neuroscience, we become what we love, we become what we love. Jesus seems to say something about that as well, doesn't he? But then she says, and who we love shapes what we become. So again, we become what we love, and who we love shapes what we become. Seems to me that's comment about identity, isn't it? And the way that develops, and who, especially who we love, will shape the kind of person. So that begs a loads of questions, doesn't it? And one of those might be, well, okay, none of us is perfect, and so my development, my identity, was imperfect. And so there are things about all of us, some more drastically than others, in terms of who we are and how we think and how we behave, that it's a bit off-centre. It's a bit not quite right, not completely whole. So that can does result in a kind of distorted view of ourselves. It's not as others, source of much pain, and visiting it on other people as well. And so, can we change? If it seems, kind of feels like it's a bit fixed, well, I don't think it's entirely fixed, but so much of it at that fundamental level is. What happens if it is painfully distorted? Well, someone like Jim Wilder, who some of us like to quote, I can tell you more about, he's a therapist and calls himself a neurotheologian. How about that? He writes some very helpful things. And he says this: trauma from early years operates two types, type A, type B. Type A is to do with the lack or even absence of good, whereas type B is the presence of bad. So the second one, type B, it's to do with abuse, it's to do with neglect, it's a whole list of things. So that's the presence of something that's actually damaging. And he says, or they say that that requires actually intervention, rather like medical analogies. It's like needing an operation, intervention, therapy, whatever it might be. But the type A thing, the lack of love and attention and resulting in insecure attachment, all the rest of it, well, that can be healed, not by some therapist, but by the presence of what was missing in the first place, which is a family and a community where you love and accept it. And type A trauma of that type, which is perhaps the majority, can be healed and restored by the presence of other people who love you and accept you. That sounds like the Christian gospel to me. And we can find ourselves changing. That's what happens to the disciples. They carry the boat, and there they are, they're scared, they're tapped into their old way of thinking and feeling, but increasingly over those 3 or so years, they have an individual connection with Jesus. So that's the individual. Their identity starts to change, as well as a collective group identity together that's changing because of the fallout, because of their attachment to Jesus. It changed their thing, and their identity changed. That seems to be what the New Testament writing all about. So it changes. We choose to place ourselves in relationships with others that transform us, especially with God. Again, that opens the door to all kinds of thoughts and actions. Very quickly, as the human, so for the biblical. So much attachment, the intersubject thinking, some people talk about intimacy. So too identity. And I put pretty much the same thing. My identity comes from and with God and other people. This is how we're introducing God to fit through them. But the principles are the same. So when Peter says we have become partakers of the divine nature, and Paul says anyone who is in Christ is a new creation, and we have been born anew, says Peter, and Jesus says unless you are born again, you can't be in the kingdom of God. He's not simply talking about some adoption because you don't share the same genetics. The Bible is very clear, it seems to me, that when we are born again, we then start to share God's genetics, and He truly is our Father. And so we are born into a new family. That is a new identity. We talk about identity. It's the nature side of it, the new man. But And there is a second dimension. You might be born again like an infant, but many people seem to stay at the infant, if not toddler stage. They don't seem to progress, and that's where the nurture comes in, just like the humans. So, here as a Christian, we need to grow. Part of that's down to me. I need to be part of a family where that can happen. People sometimes say, do they not? I can be a Christian on my own. That is partially true, first stage, but it can't possibly be true in the full sense of the word. Because I can only be a Christian just like on the stuff we talk about, in the context of you and me. Nothing as profound, it's nothing in a sense controversial, because that's how human beings function. They don't function in this other system where I'm on my own. So much name, it's not name calling, it's naming and calling in the scriptures, right from Genesis 1 and 2 onwards. And Jesus sees Peter and says, you are Simon, you will be Peter. And well, you know the story, it's just memorable. That's the good identity, isn't it? There's no question in my mind about the scriptures that identity, and Paul says in 1 Thessalonians 2, he says, like a mother I nurtured you, like a father I called you up and I named you. So today, much confusion, I perhaps we'll have to come back to that and you kind of get the feel. Is that okay? I just want to keep going for a little bit. Is that metaphor again? So humanly speaking, this is so, if I was in Africa or East Asia, I wouldn't need to talk much about this because that's the way it works. Tribes and clans and all the rest of it. But here we do need to talk about it. That is the human normality, if I can put it that way. Also true. So that leaves many questions. This one. If it's true that we are transformed through close, enduring relationships, our identity, who we are, then what relationships will transform you? And vice versa. How will you be part of the transformation of another? Does that make sense? That response to belonging. We'll have to come back to these things again, of course, because I feel I'm almost insulting you by steaming through these, but I just want to lay it out there. Again, from the human point, intimacy, identity, well, belonging seems to me especially that important dimension. I belong to another person, especially in the wider context. So, just a very quick quote from this same article. It goes on to talk about human baby. Mother and baby could not have lived very long in human development over the thousands of years on their own, separate from the group. Neither could they have survived without the support of the group. And the human brain and its capacity for language, those traits that allow us to survive in the modern world, such as self-sufficiency, independence, competitive, selfishness, blah, 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 when we lived in small groups of hunter-gatherers, would not have helped. In fact, the opposite. Our adaptive strength was then in our ability for combined and unified functioning, not in our individual separate streams. And actually, that's the way the brain works. It works best as the social brain, as being connected in all ways that we are hinting at. So we are social beings. Whatever you can say about human beings, they are social. Human, social beings. And I just like this quote. It says, every human being has a longing for something, and one thing that at the top of this is belonging. Interesting, isn't it? Longing for belonging summarizes the human condition of being. We all want to feel loved, accepted, and validated. We want to believe that our lives matter. Deep down, we want to belong to something bigger than ourselves to feel powerful. And so, biblically, once again, as for human, so in the Bible too. So, you can go through the whole of the Old Testament again and again and again. That reality of we are his people, we are sheep of his pasture, Psalm 100. Isaiah is full of it. Isaiah 43, I've called you by name, and later on, you are inscribed on the palms of my hand. In the previous verse, that though a mother may forget her young, how could that be? It is possible, but even though I will not forget you, because your name is inscribed on my hand. Isn't that beautiful? So that goes on, of course, then in the New Testament. John 10, no one will be able to snatch them from my hand. Romans 8, there is therefore no separation between us. I'll give you some references later, but that lovely one in 1 Corinthians 3, where Paul says, all things are yours. That Christ is yours, and you are Christ's. Because we belong, we are those. To be a Christian is the one who belongs. To be a Christian, follower of Jesus, is the one who belongs. It's the antithesis of this autonomous. You'll be my people, I'll be your God, and so on. Ubuntu, that is a word, isn't it? We come across it set in several African languages. Interesting word, I discovered. If that's the correct, I'm sure some of you guys will correct my understanding. Ubu is to do with the social being part of the bigger. Ubuntu is the individual. So in one word, they've encapsulated, I rather like that, both what it means to be human. It's two-sided, isn't it? It means to be human is to be part of. But it's also sometimes in cultures you can get one, in this culture we get an extreme version of the individual, but you can overdo it on the corporate and almost lose your identity. That's possible too. But the intention is that we are both. And I am, because we are person to person through other people. And again, it just struck me, I think, it was Anna who wrote this, she said, Descartes, on which much of Western thinking is built, I think, therefore I am. I think, therefore I am. This is saying something else, isn't it? I think many other questions do get that. But we, not think, but are, is pretty much what it's saying. We are, therefore I am. I think it's much closer to biblical understanding than the rest. Again, if you want to ask, you get the sense, don't you? You know, this is undoubtedly this is imperfect. It seems to me it's an example. Yeah, so much more. Woody Allen said 90% of success is turning up. And in a context where you don't turn up on a Sunday, like church, you know, it is countercultural to turn up, whether it's on Sunday morning or, in a deeper sense, turning up with other people, to be communal and not simply individualistic. How many people would say, I don't go to church anymore, Sunday morning? It's such a relief not to have to go to church and conform to these frameworks or whatever. We go for a walk. Well, it's nice for a honeymoon period. What happens a year or two down the line? And I'm completely aware of the limitations of how church often is, don't get me wrong. But to turn our back on the corporate and just go on in a simple way is the way of death, as far as I'm concerned. 90% of success is just turning up. It means inviting people to your home, it means, cups of coffee, it means all kinds of things. I've talked about it from profoundly countercultural, and I think for me, this idea of coming home is central to the gospel. John 1. In my Father's house are many abodes, same word as John 15, next chapter, abiding, same like home. So coming home to Father, coming home to each other. Again, that begs lots more questions, doesn't it? Very fun. Just briefly, okay, here's the question: who do you see belongs to? And who belongs to you, I suppose you could say, in terms of thinking about how we're going on there. Just very quickly about purpose. So there's this word intimacy. I've never come across the word extimacy, have you? But if there's extrovert, introvert, what's the other one? Various other things, and so on. It is the opposite. It means out rather than in. So if it's the inmost, then what about the outermost? Going in. So here's my conclusion on it. Both humanly but biblically, it seems to me, the deeper you go in relationally, the further you can go out purposefully and functionally. That seems to be the story of Genesis 1 and 2, but it also seems to be the story of the whole Bible, ending up in Revelation 21:22. And the best example of that is Jesus himself, isn't it? I and my Father are one. There's never been a more intimate relationship than between Father and Son. I and you and me. And in his case, because of his intimate relationship with Father, it meant his baptism, the Father said, and now you are well pleased, which is a messianic title, and he started his ministry, ending up in reconciling heaven and heaven and earth together, and bringing together conflicting groups of human in the story. The deeper we go in, the further right we can go. It's just beautifully there in the Pentateuch. So we go into the garden in Genesis, we go out of Egypt and death in Exodus, we go in again to God's presence in Leviticus, we go out to fight the battles in Numbers, and then we go into the promised land in Deuteronomy. It's kind of gospel in the linking intimacy right through to purpose, obviously, I kind of hinted at, and at so many different levels this is operating. I've just mentioned about Jesus, but it's through the church. The church is born with an intimate connection between the Holy Spirit and human beings on the day of Pentecost. And has spent 2,000 years trying to get through the toddler stage, yet it's still going. One day, the consummation will happen, and we'll be able to fully function, etc. Sorry, I just said, you get the kind of sense what we're talking about. Yeah. Begs the question, how do your relationships, identity, belong to fulfilling your? Just a small question. But as you reflect on things you've thought, you can come back to again, what does that mean for our lives? Not just individually, but together. Two metaphors to end with. Talk about the tree, and it's so often been helpful to me, but I think it works here as well. The intimacy between, right, use husband and wife as an example, mostly, not everyone does. There are indications of it, but mostly people don't know what's going on. That's right, as it should be. In the Godhead, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, there's an intimacy that most of us, not simply because of sin, but because we are created and his creator, there's that which we don't see, although we are brought into it. Out of that comes the sense of who we are. We see God special, and then of course we're able to belong, and we're able to get the idea. But I think the other metaphor that I found very helpful is thinking about it is in terms of the prodigal. So he's gone away, and he's denied who he is. And he ends up in the inevitable consequence of that. He's feeding pigs, and his whole Jewishness is insulted by being with pigs. And then comes to himself, one of the extraordinary saying, came to death and returns. His father embraces him. He just wants to be a slave, servant. You are my son. becomes implicit, his identity, he begins to live in again. We don't know the rest of the probably assume something else, and that's New Testament proves that, I think. When you know who you are, you're able to do what you're here on earth for, surely. And it comes to become intimacy. Now, of course, what I wanted to say is to give 15-20 minutes for us to be in pairs together talking about full copy. That ain't going to happen right now, but I hope it will. Maybe as you're using your thing, jot down the thoughts you're having, we will certainly return to it later. Why don't we just stand together if we're going to offer ourselves back to the Lord. So to say that I've covered a lot of ground, so I underestimate. But maybe whatever has been said, and sometimes it's just your own thoughts that then get triggered, just get hold of that. Maybe just one thing. Maybe you can't close your eyes. What one thing has emerged for you just over the last hour? Whatever it is, just latch hold of it and say, well, yes, I'm going to pick up on that. Maybe it's something that connects with other people. Perhaps it's to do with your relationship with God, all kinds of things. Just focus on that for a moment. Say, thank you, Lord. Continue to speak to me today, Holy Spirit. Open up my heart and mind, because you are my Father, and you love me. I give you my agreement, as it were, to continue to work in my head, my heart, my body, my relationships, my hopes and dreams in these days. Not just for me, but for your kingdom in this world.